Hello, everyone. This month's class is slightly different, so I'm just going to be filming it in a tutorial style for this recipe. This is our Thanksgiving recipe, which is sweet potato casserole. Just to note, I'm going to be making a half recipe. So the things that you see me preparing are going to be half, but I'm also going to make sure that I'm using or saying the full recipe measurements. So that way you have both available to you based on what you're doing. Okay, so for this recipe, the first thing we're going to want to do is preheat our oven to 350 degrees. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. And then next, we're going to start with our sweet potatoes, and we are just going to want to peel these back. So I have my sweet potatoes right here, and I'm just going to peel them using a vegetable peeler. With potatoes, a lot of times if I'm peeling them, I don't end up washing them just because we're taking the peel off anyway. If you prefer to wash them anyway, you can always do that, but I usually just end up saving this step. So I'm just holding the potato by one end and moving the peeler away from me so that I'm not putting my fingers in jeopardy. And then once I do one half, just switch it over and get the other half. If you have any deeper brown spots or something like this, I usually just go over it a few times until it's all gone like that, and you're good. Just gonna keep doing this around the whole sweet potato. All right, one down. Again, this is for the 2 is for a half recipe. A full recipe calls for 3 to 4 medium. So depending on what size your sweet potatoes are, sometimes you can only find small ones. This one's a little older, so it's got some wrinkles. It's a little harder to peel. Yeah. This one I have to do a couple layers on every once in a while since it's a little bit older, but like I said, that's totally fine. Just get down to the clear arch part. You can always cut a piece off too, if you have to. And if a piece of the peel gets stuck like that, you can always just carefully remove it before you keep going, because then it might make it harder to keep peeling the rest of the potato. Another thing you can do if you are not comfortable holding the potato or you want to make sure you're extra careful with your fingers, you can take a fork and push it into the end and then hold the potato with the fork. So then that way your fingers are nowhere near. You might just have to take it out and then move it around as you get around the potato like that. This again because it's giving me better leverage. And if you can kind of tell, the end of this sweet potato is pretty rough, so I'll probably just cut that off when we cut them up next. Okay, so I'm just gonna throw out all of these scraps quick. And then the next thing we are going to want to do is cut the potatoes into 1-inch pieces. So just cutting that end off first. I'm going to cut the potato in half. And then I'm going to cut the halves into strips. So this is giving me about 4 strips, all somewhat about the same size. And then I'm just going to cube it from there. Doesn't have to be perfect, but you just want them to all be relatively the same size. So then that way, when we boil the potatoes, they all cook at pretty much the same speed. And now I'm just going to do the same thing with my other potato. I cut it right down the middle. Do nice strips. Potatoes can be hard to cut sometimes, so you can always use your other hand to help with leverage. Just make sure you're careful, as always, with your fingertips. Last half here. All right. So now we have all of our potatoes cut up. And next thing we are going to want to do is we're going to fill a large pot with water. And we're going to generously salt it. And the key to this and for boiling any potatoes to eventually mash them is you want to add cold water to the pot. And then we add the potatoes into the water and they come to a boil together. So I've got my pot with water right here. I'm gonna generously salt it. Could even probably get a little more in there. That should be good. And then we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna add our potatoes into the water. And then we're gonna bring them to a boil with the water together. Right, so we're gonna place this on the stove. And we're gonna turn the heat on to high. And we will be back once the water is boiling. All right, so now once our potatoes are boiling like this, we're gonna set a 15-minute timer. And as that is cooking, we can work on our topping for the casserole. All right. So for the topping, we're gonna need a small mixing bowl. This is a little big, but that's what I have. So we're gonna measure out first half cup of flour. If you need the recipe to be gluten-free, you can always substitute for gluten-free flour. And I have my nice scoop in my flour container that is a half cup, so I'm just gonna grab a spoon and a knife. Because I always like to scoop into our measuring cup. Like this. And then using the knife to level it out. That way we know that there's not too much going into our measuring cup. All right, then the next thing we need is a half cup of packed brown sugar. So a lot of times with brown sugar, you'll see it called for packed brown sugar, which means you want to pack it in there. So again, I have my little half measuring cup here. And I'm just gonna take the spoon, I might finish my brown sugar, and scoop it in and then push it down. So that way we're fitting technically more than a half cup, which is why it specifies that it should be packed. Should be good. Make sure everything just like that. I'm just gonna add that in as well. All right, and then we need 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter melted. So I'm just gonna get a small dish, microwavable, or actually, I think I'm just gonna use a mug. And usually the butter should notch for you where you'll get the amount. So I'll just take my knife and count 1, 2, 3, 4 tablespoons, make a little indent there. And then cut on the indent. So I know exactly where that was. And then I'll just cut this up into a couple pieces so it'll melt a little quicker. And I'll just microwave that in 30-second intervals. And that should melt up pretty quickly. Probably won't need more than a minute total, but this depends. Yeah, so see that got me pretty much everything all melted. I'm just gonna let that sit for a sec while we keep measuring. I just need a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. With salt, and baking is slightly different, but because this isn't super baking, I usually just tend to guesstimate a little bit. But you can always measure. I'm just gonna put some salt. So let me get my 1/4. Gonna do that. Throw that in there really quick. All right, and now we can add in that melted butter. And then we'll just mix everything together, and we want to do that until everything starts to clump a little bit. So I'm just going to use that spoon from before. So we can see we're starting to get some clumps to form here. That's exactly what we are looking for. Make sure you get any of the flour that's stuck on the side of the bowls. Make sure you get all those brown sugar clumps out of there too. You can also use your hands to mix this if you want. Okay, so once that is all set, then the next thing we were going to add is 3/4 of a cup of chopped pecans. And if you have a nut allergy or you don't like nuts, you can, I mean, you could, if you don't like pecans, you can always substitute for another nut. If you have an allergy, you can always do cornflakes as well, which I have seen for this. So I have just 3 chopped pecan pieces, and I'm just going to measure 3/4 of a cup. And I see there's some spilling, so I'm just going to make sure I do it over the bowl. And then just mix those in. So that's perfect. So now we just have to wait for our potatoes to finish cooking. I've got 3 minutes left, and we'll be back when that is done. All right, so my timer just went off. I'm going to drain my sweet potatoes. And my pot actually has a lid that I can use to drain them straight from the pot. So I'm going to do that, but I just need to grab oven mitts. Turn it this way so you can kind of see. And then I'm just going to mash them right in my pot. But if you have to drain them, you could just use any sort of colander. And then transfer them to a large bowl once all water is out. Another thing I like to do sometimes too, when boiling potatoes for mashed potatoes, it's handy for something like this where I can drain them right in the pot, but just to make sure all the water is out, you can always add them back to the pot and then just put them back on that stove top with the heat staying off. And then that way, just kind of takes away any excess moisture before we start mashing them. All right, so I've got my potatoes in my pot. You can use a fork for this. You can use a ricer, you can use a masher. I'm gonna try also using a whisk. That's something I've had a lot of luck with, mashing avocado for guacamole. So I'm just kind of taking my whisk and just going into the potatoes. Doing a pretty good job. It does get stuck to it. We might just have to tap some of it out every once in a while. Or I have my knife handy still from before. Just kind of scrape it out. So if you don't want to deal with the potatoes getting stuck in the whisk, then maybe opt for a different method, but so far it's working pretty well. And it'll be easier to come out once the pieces are smaller. Stirring it a little too to get it mashed together. You don't have to make it perfectly smooth. You can leave some chunks in there if you want it like that. So this is what mine looks like right now. It looks pretty good to me. Just gotta get the excess potato out. It is pretty easy to push through, so that's not bad at least. Okay. So now we are going to want to add to our potatoes a half cup of milk. Again, if you're dairy free, always use a dairy free alternative. I'm going to use whole milk here. Just gonna put that out of the way quick. I have a liquid measuring cup here, so I'm just going to measure a half cup of whole milk. Add that in. And then we need another half cup of packed brown sugar. Gotta refill my brown sugar for this one. Okay, so we need another half cup of packed brown sugar. So it's gonna do the same thing, scoop and pat. Add that in. We need 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Measure that right into the spoon. We need a half teaspoon of salt for this, so I have my quarter teaspoon out already, so I'm just gonna do that twice. Save some dishes. 1, 2. And then 2 large eggs. So I'll just crack those right in the pot. And then I'm just gonna take my whisk and mix that all together. And I did end up working with the full recipe measurements for this because my potatoes ended up giving me more than I thought they would. So the only thing that was different for me was the number of potatoes, but it looked like the same amount of potatoes when I did 3 and recipe tested, so I said I would keep the other ingredients the same as well. Okay, so this looks pretty good to me. I'm gonna get out a casserole dish. I'm just gonna pour it in. You want to have a spatula handy in case you need to scrape the sides. Just pour it in like so. All right, and that's all that's coming out on its own. So let me just grab this spatula so I can scrape. You're cooking with someone too, this is a good 2-person task if your pot is really heavy. All right, I'm just gonna spread that out. All right, and then the next and last thing we need to do before adding into the oven is just taking our topping and just sprinkling that evenly on top. I do think I have a little too much topping, so maybe I'll save that for the muffins or something. Make sure I get all the corners. All right, so this is what we want our casseroles to look like before going in the oven. Our oven was already preheated, so we would just want to bake until it's set in the center and it's golden brown on top. Should be about 25 to 30 minutes, so I'm going to throw that in now. And then you can start checking at 25 and go from there. If your oven runs a little low, you might need a little more than 30 minutes. Just keep, after you get to 25, just keep checking on it every minute or so, and it should come out great. Hopefully this tutorial style recipe was nice for you guys to follow as well. You can always pause it and replay as you need to go at the speed that you would like. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you again soon. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Bye.